Hi, my name is Rome, and I'm a 3D graphic artist and C# game programmer. I enjoy creating and developing games. I specialize in creating games using the Unity game engine. Other software I use to develop games will be 3ds Max, Maya, Photoshop, and After Effects. I can work with 3D modeling, texturing, and animation. I can create game level environment, or I can work with scripting. I know how to program games using C# and edit it using the Unity UID Visual Studio. I can debug game errors as well as publish games in the Android store. Here is a sample game level design I created. This game comes with one scene and you can explore the game level by downloading the game on the links below. This game portfolio is aimed to show my graphic design skills in creating level design, interactable game objects, terrain, vegetations, and other game props. The next video will show my specialized skills in game programming using C#. Here is a sample 3D space shooter game prototype I made. This game comes with the following scripts. The player controller scripts enable the player to move left and right, up and down by pressing down the left and right and up and down arrow keys on the keyboard. I also assign an X and Z range to prevent the player to move away from the scene view. And pressing space bar down, the player fires copies of laser beam prefabs. I also assign a public speed variable to manually adjust the speed settings on Unity. The follow player script is a component attached to the camera. It follows the player movements. Late update is used instead of update to fix the camera stutter effect. I also assign private values for the variable to determine the camera offset values. The destroy out of bounds script deletes prefab game objects once it passes the top bound and lower bound values. The scripts prevents creating multiple copies of laser beam and enemy ships being duplicated inside the game. Detect collision is a script added to the enemy spaceship component. It detects collision on both game objects and deletes them. So once the laser beam hits the enemy ship, both game objects are deleted from the scene. The move forward script is attached to the enemy ship and the laser beam component. These scripts create speed and forward movement computed in seconds since the last frame through time.delta time. Rotate object script is a simple rotation script added to the game environment props such as the rotating tunnel, asteroids, and particle effect. The spawn manager script enables the game to create copies of enemy ships and randomly spawn them within a given location. Public game object variable ship prefab is created to assign enemy ship that will be randomly generated. Another sample prototype game I made is an endless runner. The player controller is controlled by getting the player's rigid bodies component. Add force is applied, creating a physics simulation of jumping from the ground and falling back through gravity. This line of code makes the player jump and prevents the player from double jumping. I use if statements, Boolean variables, and tags to resolve the player double jumping issues. I also lack the constraints position and rotation to avoid the game object being displaced or falling over. I created a repeat background script to create an illusion that the player is running. The move left script enables game object with this component to move left. It also finds the player and get its component. This line of codes create a condition to stop the repeating background and spawning obstacle once the player goes game over. We also added a method in the move left script to destroy obstacles once it exceeds the left bound preassigned value. I also used a compare tag to delete only the game objects I wanted to be deleted, and in this case, the obstacle prefabs and not the moving background, as both of them has the same move left script component. Under the player controller script, game over is executed once the player collides with the obstacle. Animation. The character has simple animation and we'll just explore it. Here, I am changing some values in the animation parameter to match the animation conditions and prerequisites. I will set run as the default state of the animation. Now, the player starts to run when we click play. Furthermore, by creating some codes and switching some values in the jump animation layer, we can assign a jump animation to our player. So let's check it out. Adding that animation when player collides into the obstacle prefab. On animation layers, we can choose which death animation type suits best for the scene. On the player controller script, I added this code to make the player anim variable called the death animation when the player collides with the obstacle. The code NN apostrophe game over is added to the if statement on void update to prevent the player to jump after that. The code simply tells the computer that if the player is on ground and not game over, then execute the add force jump and play the jump animation. Particle effects, creating explosion after collision on obstacle. I have created and added particle effects as a child to the player. Adjust the position and test the particle system. On the player controller script, I added a public variable called explosion particle. And on collision enter method, I added an explosion particle dot play. This line of code plays the particle. Back in Unity, since the explosion particle is a public variable, I added the explosion particle game object on the player script's components. Another particle system I added is the dirt splatter. This video shows you how to turn on and off the splatter effect. Every time the player jumps and with dies, the dirt splatter is turned off by using the .stop command. And we use the .play to make the splatter effects animation play. Depending on the game scenario, we can choose which events we would like the particle system to turn on and off. Game sound. I added a background music to enhance the game playability. I did this by adding an audio source component to the main camera. Then I look for the file for the desired background music. After that, I adjust the volume settings and click the loop to loop the background sound. Then I click the play on wake to start the sound once the game starts. Game sound effect. Adding sound effect triggers to the game code. On the player controller script, I created an audio clip class with two public variables called jump sound and crush sound. Back to Unity, I selected the files to the sound effect for both the jump sound and the crush sound. I created a variable called player audio and used audio source for its class. On the start method, I created a line for the player audio to get its audio source component. Under the get key down where the player jumped, I added the code player audio that play one shot for the audio clip jump sound, and then I enter the value for the volume. Did the same for the game over and used the crash sound instead of the jump sound. On this prototype game, I will demonstrate my scripting skills in adding gameplay mechanics to make the game interesting and challenging. In this sumo-style arcade game, if you fall from the floating island, then it's game over. So, I have created enemy spawn wave that will chase you to the bitter end and power-ups to gain certain advantage within a period of time. And using random.range, we can spawn game object randomly within the game scene. I use IEnumerator and coroutines for power-ups, made game object active and inactive to create a power-up indicator for visual awareness. I created a physics material to enhance the bounce collision between the enemy and the player, create instance for enemy spawn, use out-of-bound codes to delete enemies once they fall from the island, and increase enemy count after every wave and spawn power-ups after new waves. Here's a sample prototype I made for game user interface. This is a click and destroy game. Within this game, you have a game manager script that manages the score system. I had also designed point values for targets, and I have created good and bad targets. Obviously, if you click the skull, you got a deduction, and if you miss any of the colored balls, then it's game over. I had created other UIs here, such as the game over text, the restart button. I had created buttons for difficulty settings and adjusted the parameters to create the level of difficulty. Other things that I have made in this prototype is a game title and some moving background. Overall, this is a good template if you have a similar game on mind. So hi, it's me, Rome, and thanks for watching the video. If you would like to download the games, the links are on the description below. So I guess that's it. Later.